Story 1. The Woman in the Closet. My name is Garrett, and this happened when I was a sophomore in college. After not getting a dorm my second year, I had to scramble for off-campus housing. Long story short, I ended up in a co-op, part of a 3-house community not far from campus. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and with my bike I didn't mind the extra travel time. Most of the residents were students like me, but there were a few exceptions. Some alumni, a couple of TAs, and a few older folks finishing their degrees. But one person immediately stood out, an older woman who lived in one of the other houses. She looked to be in her late 50s, maybe older, with graying hair and a limp, as though she had a back injury. She kept to herself, always wore a blank expression, and never really spoke to anyone. The first time I saw her act strange was in the shared kitchen. The other houses had their own kitchens, so I didn't know why she was in ours. She wasn't cooking, eating, or even talking. She was just standing there, silently watching us while we made dinner and played music. It felt like she was watching me specifically, though I told myself that was just paranoia. Later that week, while doing homework, I glanced out my bedroom window and saw her again, this time in the middle of the street looking up at my window. It was cold and getting dark, yet she stood there motionless. I wasn't sure if she was staring directly at me or just in the direction of the house. Trying to be friendly, I waved. That was a mistake. She suddenly jumped up and down like a child and ran off toward one of the other houses, presumably hers. I felt sick. Not only had I confirmed to her that I'd noticed her, but I'd accidentally revealed which room was mine. That night, I asked one of my housemates about her. He said she'd always lived there and advised me to ignore her, just like everyone else did. Nobody really knew anything about her, only that she was somehow connected to the university. Some described her as harmless but odd. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. Then one night, it escalated. I stepped out of my room around midnight and nearly ran into her standing right outside my door. She didn't say anything. She just turned and walked away as if I were the one intruding. There were several incidents like that afterward, catching her snooping where she didn't belong, doing things she shouldn't be doing. Eventually, I lost my room key. All 3 houses used. To be part of a hotel, so every room had a personal lock. Most residents didn't lock their doors, but I couldn't sleep unless I did. I had a spare, but it was still frustrating. Then, one night, I woke up to a strange sound. A soft bumping, every 20 seconds or so, was coming from my closet. It sounded like something shifting inside. I got up, heart pounding, and crept toward the closet. In one swift motion, I yanked the door open. She was in there. She had one of my ties wrapped around her neck and was holding a kitchen knife. I screamed, startling her, and she lunged at me. I instinctively wrestled her to the ground and managed to disarm her quickly. She was small and frail, but the experience was terrifying. My friend Lee heard the commotion and came running. Together, we held her down while someone called the police. She had gone quiet by the time they arrived, refusing to speak. They found my missing room key in her possession. Eventually, we learned the truth. She was the property manager's sister. He had let her stay in one of the unoccupied rooms without telling anyone. She had severe mental health issues, and instead of getting her help, he just hid her there. He was later arrested for negligence and other charges. While I feel sympathy for her, I'll never forget that night, how close I came to something irreversible. I don't know why she fixated on me, but I hope nothing like that ever happens again. As graduation approaches, I'll miss college, but I'll never be able to look back without remembering her standing in that closet. Story 2. The Boy in the Bush. This story begins when I was in 4th grade, around 9 years old. I was a bit younger than most of my classmates, and because of that, I didn't get along with them very well. During recess, while the other kids played together, I preferred to bring a book and read alone. I had my own little spot, a quiet corner of the playground that hardly anyone visited. It was a large patch of clovers and overgrown plants, with a big bush that had a small gap between it and the fence. That's where I liked to sit and read in peace. One day I went to my usual spot, sat down with my back to the bush, and started reading. I had been there for a while when I heard rustling behind me. I assumed it was a squirrel or maybe a chipmunk, They often hung out in that little gap. But then I heard breathing, heavy breathing, and suddenly I felt someone tug on my pigtails. Startled, I turned around, thinking maybe my hair had gotten caught on a branch. But it wasn't a branch. There was a boy. He was crouched in the gap between the bush and the fence, hunched forward, hidden behind the leaves. His face was mostly obscured, but his arm was stretched out, trying to grab at my hair. I screamed and bolted to the picnic table area where the teachers were. I was a shy kid back then, so I didn't tell anyone what happened. After that, I stayed close to the teachers during every recess, reading in their line of sight. Later in the year, I made a new friend named Matt. He was also kind of an outsider, and we bonded quickly after being placed in the same reading group. He seemed nice at first, though I noticed early on that something about him felt off. He was clingy, he never left my side, and he always found excuses to touch me. Little things like grabbing my arm or brushing my shoulder. I didn't have other friends, so I ignored it. Then one day, Matt told me he liked me. I didn't know how to respond, so I said nothing. Apparently he took my silence as a yes, because later that evening he called my house. My mom answered and said a friend was on the phone. I took it upstairs so I wouldn't disturb her and my dad, who were watching TV. It was Matt. I barely said hello before he launched into a disturbing monologue. He started talking about what we'd name our future kids, suggested we run away together when we got to high school, and even said, "I bet you look really cute when you're asleep." I was 9. I didn't know how to process any of it, so I avoided him after that. He didn't take it well. He'd glare at me in class and act angry whenever I didn't talk to him. By the middle of 5th grade, I had another problem. I was being bullied badly. My dad eventually transferred me to a new school before the year ended. Things got much better, and in 6th grade, I got my first phone. I called my friend Clara, who had become close to me after the whole Matt situation, and gave her my new number. A few months later, I got a call from an unknown number one night. When I answered, I froze. It was Matt. His voice said, "Hey baby, I missed you so much. Why'd you leave me?" I hung up immediately, blocked the number and called Clara. She was the only one from my old school who had my contact. That's when she told me something chilling. Matt had asked to borrow her phone after school, saying he needed to call his mom. Clara, being kind and a little gullible, handed it to him. She noticed he was taking a long time and had pulled out a pen to write something on his arm. She yanked the phone back, and sure enough, he had pulled up my contact info. After that, he started calling me from different numbers every single week, 10 voicemails at a time. Every time I blocked one, he'd somehow find another. Eventually, I got a new phone, and the calls finally stopped, until high school. Some kids from my old school were also there, and one day I asked a guy named Harry whatever happened to Matt. His answer made everything click. Matt had been expelled. He had been caught sniffing and touching girls' hair, trying to sneak into the girls' locker room, writing explicit notes about classmates, and worse. I don't remember all the details, but the part that hit me hardest? Sniffing and touching girls' hair. The boy hiding in the bush, back in 4th grade. That was Matt. Let's never meet again. Story 3. The Haunted School. My younger. Years were spent moving from place to place, following whatever work my father could find. It never really bothered us. We always had each other as a constant. Eventually, we moved to a small, isolated town in central Louisiana. It was so remote that people there mistook my northern accent for a speech impediment. They'd never heard anyone speak differently from them. But the town itself was beautiful, filled with charming old buildings and friendly, welcoming people. It was the school that terrified me. On my very first day, as I walked down the hallway toward my new classroom, I was excited, hoping to make friends before we moved on again. But something felt strange. As I walked, I could feel little bumps under my feet, like the floor was uneven. But visually, it was perfectly flat, and I felt something else, something familiar and unsettling. The presence of the dead. I had always been able to sense spirits. I could feel them in my bones. It's the reason I've never been able to visit cemeteries, The overwhelming number of souls there would send me into full emotional collapse. So when I felt them under my feet, under that plain, checkered tile floor, I knew I was in trouble. Every day, all day, I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes it was just a shadow. Other times I saw figures as clearly as living people. Some looked pristine. Others bore the horrible marks of violent deaths, stuck in whatever condition they had died. But it wasn't just what I saw. I could hear them too. The constant murmur of voices that followed me through the hallways, whispering and chattering. I tried to ignore them, often turning to prayer for a brief moment of peace, but they always returned. The moment that cemented everything happened during a tornado drill. Whether by bad timing or fate, the lights went out just as the teachers lined us up in the hall. It was pitch black. I looked up. They were everywhere. The souls, some, looked just like normal people, but others were grotesquely mutilated. The worst part was how real they looked, like they were truly standing there, staring at us. Terrified, I buried my head in my arms and didn't move until the lights came back on. I never saw them like that again, but that image stuck with me. After we moved away, I found out the school had been built on top of an old graveyard, one that dated back nearly 200 years. Everyone from innocent children to farmers to cultists had been buried beneath that ground, and I had walked over their graves every single day. I'm thankful we only stayed there a few months. I never formed friendships that made me want to return, and I've never ever been in another school like that again. If these stories sent a chill down your spine, you're not alone. Sometimes the scariest places aren't haunted houses, they're the ones we see every day. Have you ever experienced something you can't explain? A strange feeling, a shadow that shouldn't. Be there or a voice when no one's around. Share your story in the comments, I read every one of them. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a moment of the strange, the creepy, and the unexplainable. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and watch your back.